The 14th century in England was fundamentally defined by trauma. The Hundred Years' War drained the country's resources, the Black Death wiped out a third of the population, and the Peasants' Revolt exposed deep, violent fractures between the ruling class and laborers. These physical and social divisions were cemented by language. The royal court and the aristocracy communicated almost exclusively in Norman French. The church and the academic elite relied entirely on Latin. On this map of medieval England, commoners spoke a highly fragmented English. Distinct Northern, Southern, and East Midlands dialects struggled beneath the dominant weight of Norman French. Because of this splintering, English was considered a lower-class tongue, entirely unfit for international diplomacy or high literature. To pull this scattered language together into a unified cultural identity, England needed someone who intimately understood both the streets where English evolved and the palaces where French ruled. Geoffrey Chaucer was born in the early 1340s to a wealthy London wine merchant. Leveraging his family's mercantile connections, his father secured him a position as a page in the royal household. This placement made him a fly on the wall among the country's most elite figures. He watched close up as the royals conducted their daily affairs in French. During this apprenticeship into the court circle, Chaucer absorbed the strict rules of aristocratic behavior, the conventions of courtly love, and the complex rhetoric required to survive near the throne. He was a commoner operating at the absolute center of power. This dual perspective allowed him to master the elite's conventions, while retaining the critical distance necessary to eventually pull those conventions apart. By the 1370s, Chaucer had transitioned from a courtier to an international diplomat, acting as a secret envoy for the English crown to negotiate trade agreements, secure loans, and form military alliances. This map plots his official missions. Travels through France and Spain brought him into contact with diverse European cultures and political systems, but his assignments to Italy provided the critical spark. In Milan and Florence, he encountered the groundbreaking works of Dante, Petrarch, and Boccaccio. These Italian humanists showed him a new way to write. Instead of strictly copying old, rigid poetic traditions, what medieval writers called authority, he learned he could base his poetry on direct human experience. These travels provided the specific material and perspectives he needed to move English beyond local dialects. He could now apply the structural precision of Italian verse to his own native tongue. You can see this new approach in his early work, The Parliament of Fowls. On the surface, it's a traditional St. Valentine's Day poem where birds gather to choose their mates. However, Chaucer twists the expected rules of courtly love. When three high-ranking eagles compete for a female eagle, or formel, she doesn't politely accept the winner. She exercises her own agency and rejects all of them. In a 14th century society that largely treated women as political property, writing a female character with the explicit power of will, acceptance, and negation was a quiet defiance of patriarchal norms. He pushed this further in his epic, Troilus and Criseyde. While adapting the story from Italian sources, he altered the narrative to explicitly critique how men restricted and mistreated women in romantic relationships. He applied that same critical lens to the ruling class. In The House of Fame, he used sharp satire and irony to mock the pursuit of political clout and the random, capricious nature of public reputation. By grounding his work in recognizable human impulses, rather than just the abstract rules of the elite, Chaucer proved that the English vernacular could handle the same psychological depth as the great continental traditions. Later in life, Chaucer took on heavy bureaucratic roles, serving as a member of Parliament for Kent and the Comptroller of Customs in London. Here, he interacted daily with merchants, sailors, knights, and clergy. The Canterbury Tales is the ultimate synthesis of those interactions. He gathered 29 diverse pilgrims on the road to a shrine and gave each of them a distinct story to tell. Crucially, he wrote the entire massive project in the East Midlands dialect of London. By choosing the language of the capital's streets and merchants, he helped solidify it into what would eventually become standard English. We see the specific variations in this diagram. Chaucer used regional dialects to reveal character. The noble knight speaks in refined verse, while the drunken miller speaks in crude regional slang, making him one of the first authors to use dialect as a comedic tool. He captured the exact rhythm of how normal people argued, joked, and complained, elevating the vernacular into a legitimate national literature. Look at this side-by-side comparison. On the left is the opening line of the general prologue, "Wham that April with his showers saute," and on the right, the modern translation. Through this process of capturing spoken language, Chaucer introduced almost 2,000 new words into the written record, words we use every single day, like acceptable, army, and angrily, appear in manuscript form for the first time by his pen. Following his death in 1400, he was buried in Westminster Abbey. Over a century later, his remains were moved to this ornate tomb, making him the founding resident of what is now known as Poets' Corner. We are still speaking a version of the language he helped standardize. By merging high court politics with the lived reality of the commoner, a London vintner's son proved that English was finally capable of supporting a national literature.